Okay, so we're going to talk about um, audit photos. So these are pre-weatherization photos. And I have it listed or labeled as A04 because that is the code for our standard file format. So when you put your photos into your file, they should be under that heading. We'll talk about that in more detail. But the first question there is, what photos are required? And to answer that, I just have a quote right out of our guidelines. So our guidelines say, anyway, yeah, so this is right out of our guidelines. So we're going to talk about this afternoon, but there are a number of resources you need to be aware of. The main one is you need to know where to find our program guidelines. If you are newer to this kind of stuff, new to the audit, you can find our program guidelines right here. The URL is a long one. It is not simple to find. I have to bookmark it, but it's this jobs.utah.gov, and then you do a / and housing, because this program falls under the Division of Housing, and then SCSO, and then a /WAP /IWTC /resource.html. It used to be much simpler, but our masters went and messed that up, so make sure to bookmark it if you need it. But we have a few things here about the weatherization program, but we've tried to list a lot of our resources here. There's a few other areas that we'll go to, but if you need to grab a hold of a copy of the program guidelines, this, especially for auditors and QCIs that are reviewing auditors, this part really becomes your Bible. And so you will want to have access to that, and you don't want to download a copy on your desktop and just use that copy. You want to use the link to the most recent version that is on the website, because that will always be the standard that we will hold you to. So if, say, in 2 months from now, a new version of the guidelines is posted, so I don't know if you can see, but the copy that I have open and the one that I will be working off of and teaching out of today is actually it's the one that becomes effective on July 1st. So this one does not actually match the one that you have access to. There's a few minor changes, but the one that if you go out and if you go out and audit a home today, then you will be held to the standards that are written in that current version of the guidelines. So make sure that you're always, like, I've just had to force myself to get in the habit of opening this version and using it, and I've stopped making notes or anything like that on my guidelines to help me with that. So I would encourage you to do the same. But anyway, so you'll need to have you'll need to have access to the guidelines, and there are a couple of sections in the guidelines that as an auditor you're going to need to be familiar with. The first one being section B9. I have put as much of the information as it pertains to energy audits as I possibly can in B9. There's really not a field guide for auditors, not a separate one. This is your field guide, section B9. So I hope that most of the questions, most of the issues that you'll run into, the majority of the time, are addressed here in section B9. If you have not read it, by the time we're done, you will have read it. We are going to go through, I think, almost every aspect of this section. The other section you'll want to be very familiar with is section E. That's our health and safety section. And we are only going to skim this one. We'll talk about the way it's laid out and kind of how to use it, but we really won't go too deep on this one. But this is one, especially if you're auditing homes, you need to be very familiar with this section so that you clearly understand when a measure is a health and safety measure. But we'll get into that. I can't remember if we'll do that tomorrow or on Thursday. But anyway, but make sure you have access to section or to the guidelines so that you can find answers to your questions when you need them. So with that, anytime I'm quoting something out of the guidelines, I haven't always written out Utah WAP guidelines or anything like that. You're just going to see this reference to whatever section I'm in. So hopefully that's clear enough. And the question there is, what photos are required? And our guidelines, the current version of the guidelines actually says less than this. I've added some clarification for this version that becomes effective July 1st. So it says photographs of the pre-weatherization conditions of each dwelling should be taken. And we've been very careful to use either should or shall or must. Should leaves us a little bit of leeway. Should usually denotes that this is a best practice, but you don't always have to do it. But this is one of those rare instances where I have left the word should in there, but I'm going to require that you do this. But I've left the word should in there to give us a little bit of wiggle room, because you're not going to need to take these photos on every single house. Some houses may not have some of these things. But also, I have taken enough photos to know that I regularly go into houses and I will forget a photo or two. And I don't want anybody from the federal level coming in and holding us to too high of a standard. Like, as a best practice, you should be in the habit, you should find methods to make sure that you're taking all these photos, but I don't want our guidelines set up to where somebody could come in and hang us out to dry. So photographs of the pre-weatherization conditions of each dwelling should be taken. These should include at a minimum photos of all four sides of the exterior of the home, all combustion appliances, their venting systems and nameplates, all electric appliances to be evaluated, any visible deficiencies in the thermal and air barriers, and then there's an etc. So basically, as an auditor, you should be taking photos of anything that we're going to touch during the weatherization process. Why would we do that? What's the point of us going in and taking all these photos?
The pre-pictures show what was there before we did the work, so it can help justify maybe like why we did or didn't do something, or I think it can also help you to go back and get information when you're working on entering stuff into the NEAT or MIA audit.
Yeah, has anybody found that to be true?
Yes.
Are there any other good reasons to do this?
Hey, Matt.
Yeah.
We also found that sometimes when you take the pre's, we've had the client claim that we've done something, ruined something, wrecked something, broke something, and we were able to prove in our pre-photos that it was already existing.
Yeah, Anybody else had any of those experiences? Hopefully we don't have too many of those, but we do have those. Those happen all the time. And, you know, usually they get resolved without having to pull the photos out, but that really is one of the reasons. And that's, it helps us to put the pieces together afterward, helps us to figure out when we're doing our quality assurance stuff, if a QCI is trying to figure out how to improve the process, you can use the photos to identify where the process broke down sometimes. And honestly, you can use the photos sometimes to show that you guys really didn't do what the client said you did. So yeah, but primarily they're used for exactly what Carrie Lynn mentioned. But there are a few other reasons why we do it. So, okay. So the second bullet there, or .ii, says that photos should be organized and context should be included to describe the purpose of each photo as it pertains to weatherization. And I just asked the question, like, how do you guys feel about that? Those of you who do add the context, do you feel like it's useful at all? Is it just a total pain in the butt?
No, it's very useful. Like Carrie Lynn said, having something to see what it looked like pre-weatherization. You mentioned having something to go back and jog your memory when you're doing the audit into neat.
Yeah. Have any of you ever gone back and looked at a photo and thought, why in the world did I take this photo?
Yes.
Or like, what in the heck is this photo of? Or what was I supposed to remember about this photo? So this adding context, basically what I'm asking you guys to do there is to write a caption on some of your photos. You don't have to write a caption on all of your photos, but I would strongly encourage you to get in the habit of going through your photos after you've put them all together in some sort of a report. That's the organized part. Take some time to actually look at them and think about, do any of these need additional description so that, you know, a month from now I can remember what in the world this photo was about or why I took it. That's really what's being asked there. If you're not in the habit of that, or if you're new to this, make sure and do that. And we'll talk about how to do easy ways to do that as we get going. So here's a question. What information is in this photo?
You can see the window. It's like you can see what the seal is made out of.
Yeah. So
Other than that,
what
sure.
are your guesses there that maybe the window's made out of?
Looks like a vinyl.
Yep. And then Osvaldo, you said this seal as well.
Mm-hmm.
So like, are you talking about the tile part there?
Yeah.
Okay, so we can see that there's probably a vinyl window and probably a tile windowsill. What other information's in this picture?
The outside of the house is brick.
Yeah, outside is brick, and then there was another comment there.
Double pane.
And double pane. Yeah. So how about, yeah, so I put double pane, vinyl, tile, sill, brick, veneer. What about this one? What information's in this photo?
Stove and microwave.
How does that stuff pertain to weatherization?
The exhaust fan over the stove doesn't go through the roof.
Yeah, it likely doesn't go outside, or at least doesn't go through that cupboard that's open, right?
Right.
Which is usually the case if they've vented them outside. What else?
It's hard to tell from the picture, but it looks like an electric cooktop.
Yeah. That is a piece of information we need to know. We want to know if there's a combustion appliance in the kitchen, right? And just because there is not one, that's still information we need to gather. Now we have an answer to that question. What else? There was one other thing that I could see.
But there's a window in the kitchen
Yeah, what does that have to do with weatherization?
for ASHRAE?
Yeah. So I've got electric or gas range. Does the microwave exhaust to the exterior? I put microwave, or it should have been the vent. Oh, I think I switched pictures. And is there an operable window in the kitchen? So those were the pieces of information that I see there. And there could be a few more. There's some drops, you know, in these little drop downs. Might be some value. But I typically have a picture that looks like this in every one of my files because of all the information that's in there. So what info is in this photo?
The bathroom has an exhaust fan. There's a window in the bathroom and a register on the ceiling.
So what's the register on the ceiling tell us?
That it's heated.
That your ductwork is in the attic.
Yep, both of those things. And that's in this case, we would need a little more information to know whether or not the ductwork whether this was a ceiling that has a floor above it or whether this was an attic above. But it's exactly the kind of information that we're after when we're in the home. Anything else?
You're kind of getting the light bulbs in the photo.
Yeah. Yeah, so I've got exhaust fan, operable window, lighting, and duct locations. So yeah, you can get a ton of information from these photos just by snapping a couple of photos. In fact, I've gotten to where I'd say I gather probably 70 or 80% of the information on an audit with my photos. Does anybody have any tips or tricks or anything that you guys do as you're looking at these, or are there any photos that you regularly like to take that help you to gather information? These are some of my most common ones that you know, that we've gone through inside the house. And I see a lot of the same things. There's also, you know, some of the HVAC equipment and stuff that we'll talk about as we go on. But so let's talk about exterior photos for a minute. Our guidelines in July will say that photos of all sides of the exterior must be taken. And the biggest issue that I have with the exterior photos is this part right here. Like, when you're taking photos of the exterior of a home, it's okay if you have 15 photos and there's a whole bunch of them where you can only see one window or something. But at a bare minimum, there should be 4 photos in every file that have some daylight on each side and on top, and some grass or weeds or hubcaps or something on the bottom, just so that you can actually see all sides of the house, or all, you know, as much of the house as you possibly can. Now, sometimes they're going to be blocked by trees, but usually there's going to be enough daylight or something going on. So get back as far as you can and get photos that, you know, give us an idea of what's going on. Why is it important to have these exterior photos?
SHPO requires them.
Yeah. What information are in these photos here as it pertains to weatherization?
Got the
Stores.
I heard windows, doors.
Your thermal and air barriers, they could help point out where they are.
Yeah, this should be a pretty good representation of your thermal and air barrier. What else is in these photos?
It gives you an idea of where chimneys are.
Yeah, got some chimneys. I don't know how clear this is on your end, but you can see some venting. But yeah, it's really, if we're taking a house as a whole system approach when we weatherize the house, then we really should have something that looks like this so that we can take a look at the whole house from the outside and from the inside. And the nice thing about this is you guys could probably all draw up the footprint of this house based on these photos. This really helps us to get a good idea of what we're dealing with if we've never been to that home. So this was one of the specific things that I was surprised to see DOE listed this. DOE actually requires that these 4 photos are in every audit file. And they got very specific about that. So I suspect they've had similar issues with it. So, and then just bad versus good. As I mentioned a minute ago, like if I had 4 photos that looked like this, how confident would you be that you know how many windows are on the front of this house? Now I've got all of the windows on the front of this house except for, I think that this basement window over here is not showing up from this angle. And you know, hopefully I'd have another photo from this other corner of the house that would show all of that. But without that daylight on both ends of the house, I can't really be sure unless I play inspector and go start piecing together all of the other photos. I can't really be sure if this is an accurate representation. So make sure, be very cognizant of that. And now I realize there's so many houses you go to that you just can't get that far back. What do you guys do when you run into that? If you can't get back far enough to get daylight on either end, what are some things you can do?
Take 2 photos that show at least over half of it, so then you can put them side by side in the report.
Yeah, like that's, if you do have to play Inspector Gadget and you have, you know, side-by-side photos in the report, then I could see, hey, this one there's daylight on the left and this one there's daylight on the right. So I can quickly get that mental picture. Anybody have anything else? There's one other trick that somebody taught me just a few months ago that I found works really well, is to take those panoramic photos. They get a little bit wonky looking, but do you guys know how to take a panoramic photo with your cameras and stuff, or with your iPads? Each of them are a little bit different, but like I literally had to have somebody point out how to do it on my iPad because I couldn't figure it out. So if you're not familiar, like Google it or have somebody help you, but but that actually works very well. I found, I don't know why, but particularly in mobile homes where there's not a ton of space between the houses, I end up taking a lot of those panoramic photos where I can scan and get the whole side of the house in one photo. So so yeah, I recommend that you try that as well. So yeah, good versus bad photo. Just on the exterior, make sure you're getting like the whole sides. This one is totally fine if I have the 4 photos that look like this, but if I don't, then this one becomes a bad photo. So here's another great example. You know, you can only see so much in this photo here, but I get a much bigger picture when I stand back a bit. So so it said we need those 4 photos of the exterior, but also the guidelines tell us that we need to photo all the unique exterior features that will be of note in the weatherization process. So some of those things can be like cantilevers or exposed floors, exterior walls that are buffered by a garage. How many times have you got back and started wondering, like, wait, you know, what did those walls in the garage look like because I forgot to photo them? Was there an alcove or was that a straight wall? But yeah, so exterior walls that are buffered by a garage, any vent terminations, window and door details, and any exterior HVAC equipment. So after you've taken those 4 photos, or while you're taking those 4 photos, you need to be looking for these aspects of the of what's going on the thermal boundary and what's going on with our venting of our combustion appliances and any other aspect of weatherization, and making sure that your photos include those things or that you get those close-up shots. So what's going on in this picture right here?
Is that a deck with a sunroom built on it?
Yep.
Because the floor of that deck's insulated under that room.
Yep. Yeah, this is an important part of the picture. It's just that there's something going on with the thermal boundary here and here, and I have additional pictures where you can see that there were some issues with the thermal boundary here. But yeah, just great examples. The cantilevers, why would you want a picture of a cantilever? What would this photo tell us when you got back to the office?
That area is exposed to the ambient temperature, weather.
Yeah, that is part of the thermal boundary right there. It comes down this wall, goes across here, comes down this wall. And, you know, like for Eldon, the guys at Utah Community Action, they do a great job of they actually cut into the aluminum soffit. They just drill holes and do a close blow on them and plug those holes. Or if your agency removes this aluminum soffit and replaces it with a solid substrate, you know, that kind of information is something that the crews will want to know what's going on so that they can order the appropriate amount of materials. If I had a good sketch that showed me that this was, 18 feet long, and I've got a good photo, now I can figure out how many sheets of T111 I'm going to send out on this job if I'm going to fill that with insulation or whatever. So that kind of stuff can be very, very valuable. What about this evaporative cooler? How has that how does that come into play, or why is that valuable? You guys ever had the window coolers disappear during weatherization, or have you ever installed a new heat pump or something and now that window evaporative cooler kind of is no longer part of the weatherization equation? We'll talk more about how we actually enter the cooling systems on the homes, but this one actually becomes a really important part of the puzzle, and it's extremely valuable to have that documented so you can see what your pre-weatherization conditions there were, and and then the audit will help tell the rest of the story. So, all right, so you've got to photograph your exterior features. The other things you want to photograph are your thermal and air boundary. Now, in a little bit here, we're going to do an assignment. And for those of you who are in your office, this may be more difficult. But if you're able to do it in some format, I want you to still do it. And I think it'll work just fine in your office as well. But we're gonna have each of you go around and actually take photos of the building or the house that you're in, and to try to capture all these things. So be thinking about them as we're going through these slides and thinking about where you would take some of these photographs. So we covered the exterior. Now we're on to you need to be photographing your thermal and air boundaries. So these are some of the photos that I forget to do the most, is actually stick a tape measure into the insulation wherever I am, so that I actually have recorded the depth of the insulation. But if you're measuring the depth of a wall, if you run into a wall and you can see that it's a 2x6 wall or a 2x8 wall that's kind of out of the ordinary, and so you know that that wall cavity is extra thick, those are some valuable photos. If you'll just stick a tape measure in there, that'll usually jog your memory and help you know why you took that photo. But yeah, so photograph insulation depths in attics, walls, and floors. You should be photographing any bypasses or holes in the pressure boundary that might need to be addressed. Don't know if you've ever had that bathtub where there was no floor sheeting under the bathtub just because of the way they put the house together. Or for Shad, I'm thinking about that house in American Fork that I met you and Jake on a while ago, and there was just that big giant hole out the west side of the house that it took us a little while to find. But yeah, some of those things are really important to capture so that you know what's going on, and so that it'll help you remember that you're going to write a measure, a unique measure about that to address it. What's going on in this picture here?
Looks like a drop ceiling, like a split level home, and that wall is exposed to the upstairs and it's not insulated.
Yeah, this is some sort of knee wall. It looks like there's a flat roof or a flat ceiling over here, and this one's probably vaulted. And so we have an interior knee wall that's not insulated. So a photo of that or a thermal image from the inside would be a great photo to have in the file to help you remember and to communicate with others about what they're going to fix. And then photograph the condition of any insulation dams or heat shields or attic accesses or any unique aspects of the thermal boundary that need to be addressed. So yeah, you guys run into anything unique on that one or anything weird that you've seen lately? Windows and doors. You want to photograph the condition of windows and doors. This is one where I don't expect an up-close photo of every window in the house. It's usually not necessary. And as we get into windows, like entering them into the audit later today, we'll talk more about it, but an auditor has to make some sort of a decision about the leakiness of the window, and it's very, is it objective or subjective? I can't remember which is which. Basically, it has a lot of the auditor's opinion involved in it. So sometimes having a million photos of all of the windows in a home could actually raise some eyebrows if somebody, if an auditor listed the windows as very leaky and then all of their photos showed otherwise. It could actually cause you some problems. My rule of thumb is I will take auditors at their word on whatever you decide the leakiness of the window is, because I wasn't in the home and we don't have a technical test that you have to conduct on them. It really is based off of your assessment or your opinion. But yeah, you do want to capture some of the windows and doors, especially if you're going to be doing any lead work on them or any just replacing those windows and doors. To have some good interior and exterior photos would help you communicate to whoever's doing that what tools and supplies they might need. What about this one? What about this broken window pane? Why would it be important to capture that?
In case it's replaced, then you have proof, a photo proof of if it was cracked at the audit.
Yeah. That's something that when you run the audit doesn't tell you to replace that because it's broken. And so oftentimes if you are addressing a broken window, you're going to have to do it in a way that's not an energy conservation measure. It's going to end up being a non-audited measure. And it's actually a specific requirement in the guidelines that anytime you replace broken glass as a non-audited measure, you have to have a photo in the file of it. So make sure any cracked windows, take a picture of them, because that will help you when you're writing your air sealing strategy and when you're determining whether or not to address that kind of stuff. So, and then, if you have threshold issues or anything like that, this one's not huge, but if there was something unique going on, or if you wanted to point out that it already had a shoe on it and it's sagging, stuff like that, you may want to capture some of those things. So, heating and cooling equipment. I capture most of the information about a furnace with my camera. So photograph the heaters in the home. And this is not just the forced air furnace. If there are other heaters in the home, if the client is using electric plug-in heaters throughout the house, take photos of that. Because when you see those 7 photos of all those electric heaters, in case you'd forgotten since you were in the house, you will then remember that, oh yeah, the client they weren't using their wood stove, they weren't using their old oil furnace, they were actually using electric heat. And that will help you to remember and also to communicate why you would have selected electric heat as their primary source of heat on the home. But make sure you're photographing the heating source of the home, primary and secondary heating sources. When they're combustion appliances, make sure that you're photographing their venting systems so that you can see, whether they're vented properly. And I also like to photograph the manufacturer's label. This is one where you can't snap a quick photo. You do want to take some time and look at your photo. Make sure that it's not too blurry, because when you get back to the office, if your photo was the way that you documented the model number and the efficiency and the outputs, you'll want to make sure you'll be able to read that. And what I do is I will typically take a picture of the front of the furnace And then immediately after that, I'll have a picture that shows the manufacturer's label. So I know that that was the label that went with that photo or went with that furnace. I do the same thing on the air conditioning unit. I'll take a picture of the air conditioner, and then I'll take a picture of the label right after that. And with the water heater as well, I do the same thing with if I'm conducting combustion tests, then I actually will take a picture of the furnace, and then my very next picture will be a picture of the tape from my combustion analyzer, the paper tape. But that way I know without writing on the top of that tape while I'm in the field that that was the tape that went with the furnace. Or I will try to hold that tape in front of the furnace so that I can actually see the furnace in the background of my tape. But I do that instead of writing down, furnace. I just snap a photo of it, and then those tapes that come out of the combustion analyzers, some of them fade quickly, and so if I have a photo of the tape in the file, that is, something that won't fade. So you want to photograph the air conditioners in the home and their manufacturer labels as well. So this is one I see a mixed bag on. I'd bet that maybe 60% of the program does really good at this, and then the rest of them just write down the make and model numbers. And I have clarified that it's important that we actually document or photo document this stuff to show that that was actually the appliance that was in the home before weatherization. Water heater is the same thing. And I feel like the water heater, the venting system on the water heater becomes more important. A lot of the homes that we're getting into, they are high efficiency furnaces, and they're, vented in PVC, and there's typically not a lot of issues with the venting systems on them, but you're going to see more problems and issues with water heater vents. So this is where you want to make sure you're capturing a good image of what's going on with that venting system, at least as far as you can see. And then here's a great example where luckily this was clear enough. I'm still able to read it, but it did get a little blurry on my water heater label. But I like to capture the appliance, and then I like to capture that manufacturer's label or sticker or whatever you want to call that. So the oven, we've already talked about it. I do in almost every client's home, I'll open that cupboard up and just basically determine whether or not they're venting the stove through the cupboard or not. Now, if I found a home where it was vented out an exterior wall right here, then I would probably not include this photo because I don't want to make a mistake on this. I don't want to tell myself something that's inaccurate, or I would take a minute and actually write myself a note right across the front of this photo. But even if this is not a gas oven or stove, I still want to know if that's vented out the top for ASHRAE purposes. So I like to gather that information. So photograph the oven, show whether it's a combustion appliance, photograph whether there's an exhaust fan above for ASHRAE. Bathroom windows and exhausts, we talked about this already. Whether there's operable windows, you need to know that, and whether there's exhaust fans for ASHRAE. And I've also seen where some agencies, depending on the types of switches you guys use, you may photograph the wall switch so that you can know whether it's a regular standard switch or a Decora switch, or if you're going to need a double gang or triple gang cover plate to, finish the job. You may want to include those types of things. Photograph the location and condition of existing duct system. The duct system is one I feel like a lot of auditors go into a house, you get a mental picture of the duct system, and then you never communicate that to anybody else. And so a photo can really, really help to communicate that, along with your diagrams, and then also just some good field notes that say, you know, 60% of the ductwork was in the attic, or all of the ductwork was inside the envelope, or, you know, some of that information that actually just talks about whether or not there was ductwork outside of the envelope is something that we fail to capture a lot. But yeah, so snap photos of that. If there's any problems with the ductwork, like there's a hole in this flex duct, that would be good to capture. And these don't always tell the full story, as we talked about with that picture of the bathroom, but you know, if you have a picture showing that there's duct on the ceiling or a big return on the ceiling, that can help you to remember bits and pieces about the duct system. So refrigerators, this one is really important that you capture the manufacturer's sticker that lists the model number on the fridges. I've been watching this one closely, and it's really, this is how you're going to show me that you put in the accurate model number into the audit, and that you didn't need to meter this fridge, or if you take this photo and this does not show up in the database of fridges, then this will be your indication that you should have, or that you do need to meter the fridge. But also, for some strange reason, fridges change during the process. Just on this year's monitoring, we went into a home, and actually I think there were 2 instances where people said, you know, I had to ask them, was this the fridge that was here at the audit? And they're like, oh no, I just got that one from my sister, or something like that. So you'll want to capture this information when you're out on your audit. Lighting, oh, actually, let me go back to fridges real quick. There's one thing that's really important. Opening that cupboard above the oven and opening a fridge can kind of get into people's personal space. So even if at their front door you told them, or ask them if you're okay to kind of open all the doors in their homes and go into every room as you're doing your audit, I always like to ask them right before I open their fridge and their cupboard if they mind if I do that. So just be aware that you're not, you know, that you're talking to the client before you crack that fridge open, or any other, you know, medicine cabinets or anything like that. Make sure that you're communicating with the clients what you're doing and why you're doing it. I always just like to, you know, say, hey, do you mind if I open your fridge so I can get a picture of the model number really quickly? So lighting's one where I will go through files, and there'll be like 7 or 8 photos of light fixtures, and there's really no way to tell from the light fixtures what kind of bulb was in them. There's really no valuable information in the photo. You do not need to go through a house and take photos of every standard bulb in the house, because that's something you guys have on your shelf. If an auditor goes through and counts and says there's going to be 27 regular bulbs that need to be replaced, there's really no need to have 27 photos or anything like that. But I recommend that any light fixtures that are non-standard bulbs, that you take a picture of them. And this is I'll get on my soapbox when we get to lighting, but this is a missed opportunity in our program. And I would really encourage you guys to start watching for the light fixtures that are either, you know, this has a standard base on it, this globe light, but it's a globe light. It's not a normal light bulb. But if you will run that in the audit, you will find that it has a huge payback, because this might be a bathroom that has 6 of those globe lights, and they're all 40 watts each. And if you could swap them out with LEDs, there's some substantial energy savings there. So watch for those, these little candelabra bulbs. Yes, a replacement LED bulb can cost $7, but if this fixture is in the middle of the house and it's on for a few hours every day, you'll find that that actually has a payback. You could replace all of those bulbs with some nice expensive LED bulbs, and you'll decrease their energy burden. So if you're going, if you're running into that kind of stuff, I recommend that you take some photos of it and take some good notes so that you can get the right size bulb. If you need to, take the bulb out and photograph the base, or lay the base across the tape measure and photograph that. Photograph any health and safety issues that workers need to either be aware of or address. So these are just a few things. I'm sure you guys have run into others, but typically open junction boxes or open panels and things like that. Really just something like that in a work order can be very valuable. Something like that in a work order can be very valuable. I don't know if any of you have been bitten before, but I sure have. And there were notes on the work order that said, watch out for the dog, and I still went out and let myself get bit. But and then the last thing is, I think this is the last thing, if you've gone through the whole house and you've really captured everything that you know it's going to show up on the audit, or you know you're going to evaluate it, but now you got to kind of think about those things that are going to be itemized measures, or they're really non-standard weatherization things. And capturing those, again, can, like, if I've taken a photo of this, then when I get back to the office, that may have been the only note that I took, that there was a missing cap on this. But that will help me to remember to add that to the itemized measure list to address. Or, inside a crawl space, you may need this to show what kind of issues you'll run into, or to remind you that you're going to have to remove some debris, or just, to give you the layout of the crawl space. But that's going to be, putting a vapor barrier in here is going to be a health and safety issue that you're going to list as an itemized measure. Some idea of what's going on with a belly, or maybe a plumbing repair as an incidental repair before you do your belly insulation. This was a good one. This was a house that the door was basically like it was not a hollow core door. It was just a solid wood door, but the wood on it was so thin and so cracked that door just leaked like a sieve, and the client had actually put the plastic over the door to keep the door from leaking. And so stuff like that under normal conditions, you're going to put that in as a solid door because that's what it is, and the audit will likely, it will not pay back, but you may need to address that door because it's the right thing to do. So think about all of those things as you're taking photos. Let's see. Where are we at on our time? So we're shooting to be finished with this in 45 minutes. Let's do this for the next 15 minutes. So it's almost 8:55 right now. I'd like each of you to go photograph the house you're in. So let's meet back here at 9:10, and so take your phone or your digital camera and go capture your exterior photos, your interior photos, any photos you can of your thermal boundary. Go photograph the house or the building that you're in, and get those on your phone. All right. What'd you guys find when you were out photographing? Anything interesting about the building you're in, or anything you hadn't really thought about or noticed before?
Yeah, it's my house. I'm pretty familiar with the outside and that. I did when I was going around taking those pictures that we sent to you before the class started. I did find one where I had a void in my, it was a buffer wall to the garage, and I never noticed that before until you had us do this. And so that needs to, I'll have to get some insulation in there. And then no CO detector and a few other minor things.
Gotcha. Anybody else? Were you guys able to get good outside photos with some daylight on each side? Or do you guys, are you in a building or a home where there's lots of trees and stuff in the way that make that difficult?
No, I was able to get the 4 sides with light on both sides.
Nice. What about anybody find anything interesting with their HVAC equipment or the venting on any of your combustion appliances? So you're going to have an assignment, and that's basically going to be to put these photos together into a report. You'll need to compile them, add a little bit of context, and submit them as one of the assignments for this class. So, but yeah, so that will be the assignment based on what we're talking about right now, is that we actually organize the photos as the slide says here, and add context. So we've already read this requirement, but I put it back up there. The photos should be organized. I have to say I'm still surprised at the number of audit files that I come to where there's one pile of photos in the file, and the file's not organized well enough to where I can't even determine whether those photos were taken at the audit or if they were taken at the QCI or some other part of the process. So it's like imperative that you actually put them somewhere and label them as audit photos. If you do nothing else, that would be the most important thing you can do, is to identify them as these were the photos that were taken at the audit. But what you're required to do is actually put them into some sort of a report format, and then add context as it applies. So
So for
photos,
that, we could label the A04, whatever the client's name, and then put audit photos, and then label, put a little text with each photo, and then put them in that file. We don't have to put audit on each photo.
no, you don't have to put audit on each photo. Yeah, just like, so here's an example that basically, so you want to put them into some sort of a report, and we're going to talk a little bit about a couple of options to do that, but on the screen here's an example of one. So the title, which is blurred out because this was a real one out of a file, but it labels these as A04 audit photos, and it has the client's name at the top. Also, just simply having the date, if you've forgotten to put in, that these were audit photos, I can see by the date and by the date on your blower door test that these were the photos that were taken at the audit. But the best thing is to actually clearly identify them as the audit photos. If you're putting everything into the file format that you're supposed to, that also helps quite a bit. But yeah, so your photos should be organized into a report, preferably into some sort of a PDF. And we'll talk a little bit about that. The PDF just makes it so that your agency can actually store those in a much smaller amount of disk space. And it allows you to, put them into a format that you can put them in to your electronic file with everything else that's associated with that audit file. Your photos really need to be large enough so that you can see what's going on in the picture. And sometimes that gets difficult, but typically if you're fitting 4 to 6 photos on one 8.5 by 11, page, and you're not leaving a ton of white space, typically your photos will be large enough to see what's going on. And then again, context should be added to all photos that require additional explanation to a person not familiar with the project. I've been trying to find a better way to say that, and that's the best I've come up with. If you're trying to, somebody else came and started flipping through your photos and they, would have questions about why you took the photo, that's probably a good rule of thumb there. So here's an example of the photos not being large enough. Make sure you're not leaving a ton of white space on your photo reports. And then context should be added. So here's a picture. Can you guys tell me what's going on in this picture?
Looks like a furnace and a closet on the outside of the house, I'd say.
Yeah. What kind of context would you want to add to that picture?
Maybe what side of the house it is.
Yeah.
It's next to the front door. I don't know.
Yeah, so the thing that I noticed about this particular furnace, normally you'll see water heaters like this on mobile homes all the time. This one was a little bit unique in that it was the furnace. And so this furnace is drawing air from right here, and this cabinet was completely uninsulated. The door was uninsulated, and arguably you may or may not have an opportunity to add any insulation, but that's probably what I would have looked at that and thought, okay, as an auditor, is there any way that I can improve the thermal boundary in this area so that we're not sucking air, or even the air barrier, make a tighter seal on the door. But basically, given some context or some reason why you took the photo would be very, very helpful if you get back into this photo later or this file later, or if you're trying to, just by doing it, it'll help jog your memory to add the measure to your audit, and it'll also help for those who are looking at your file later. So this is a decent example of something you'd want to add context to. I hope that just by some of you guys sitting there going, I don't know what I would add to it, is kind of the point. Like, when you take a photo for some specific reason, you're usually the only one that really understands why you took that photo. So add some of those details when it's necessary. And that's really, really hard to define. So I'm fairly flexible when I'm looking at files. If I'm seeing some context on some of the photos and it helps me to better understand the project, then that checks the box for me. That's all I'm looking for you to do. Let me go back to this one.
So if you insulate that, then you'd have to make sure that you didn't cut off that it's still getting the required combustion air, correct?
Correct. Yeah. This one shows it has the east side, north side, west side, all of that stuff labeled. That stuff's really good as well. I'm not asking you to do that on every single photo. Like, do not get into your audit photo file and spend 45 minutes adding context because Matt Turner said you have to. I want you to be efficient at putting your audit files together. Just get in the practice of going through them and thinking about each photo and thinking, do I need to add any notes to this photo? Is there anything here that I might forget, or anything that I can explain to anybody else that's going to touch this file, that would help here? This one that says front door jamb, I could probably figure that one out. I think most auditors would go, okay, this is probably one of the exterior doors, it might be valuable to label which one it was, especially if there was a problem with it. But yeah, at least be looking for those unique photos that are a little bit oddballs, and add some notes to why you've taken the photos. So when it says that the file needs to be organized, a folder with all of your photos in that folder is not organized. What I find on these is that there ends up being lots of extra garbage and extra photos that don't need to be there. Sometimes photos that aren't even of the job, could be a different job. But also the file size of this is very large, and because it's not put into a PDF, it's not going to end up getting put with all of the other reports or all of the other parts of the audit file. So in time, this piece is going to go missing. So this one, just leaving the photos in a folder on your computer is not considered organized, and as you can see, there is no context. I've seen some where they'll actually change the file names, but that is very tedious. So I highly recommend that you find a good app or a good process to just put them into some sort of a report. This is 2 report tools that I'm aware of. The one over here on the right is an app that you can download for your iPad. So I think you can find that in the iTunes or the Apple Store. It lets you basically put photos into a grid, and you can add text or context to it. I've used it a couple times. It's pretty slick, especially, if you've got all your photos on your iPad already. That one's a great one to look into. Just search for that. You should be able to find it. The other one that I found is a tool. This is the tool that I use. It's in Microsoft Word. And I don't use Microsoft Word except for this. Like, let me see if I can pull it up. So this thing is actually a plugin, which is kind of like an app or whatever, but basically you can just download. You can download this and add it to the tools in Microsoft. And I think I have a link and stuff for you in a minute. But what it does is, in this, they call this the ribbon up here, but it actually just added this photo gallery tool to my ribbon in Microsoft. And I'll just show you. So this is how it works. If I'm going to turn a bunch of photos into a report, first I'm going to come in and I'm just going to say these are audit photos. The client's name, and the date. So I'm at least going to put those 3 pieces of information. I actually have I made myself a little form so that I always remember to put those 3 things into this report. But then after that, now that my cursor is right here, all I have to do is I click on the gallery control. I'm going to go looking for my photos. So I set the source folder, and as you can see here, it's already got a bunch of stuff in it. I'm going to add all of them. So this is the list that I'm going to put into the report. And I think I'm going to remove this first one because it's probably the very first photo I take at every job is actually a picture of the client's name. Whether that's their name next to their front door, or I capture a screenshot of my calendar that shows their name and address on the date and time that I was supposed to be there. Anything like that, I always capture the client's name first. So I removed that one just so that it's not on this video. But I've got all these other photos, and all I do is I click Create Photo Gallery, and all it's doing is it's creating a table, and in the first row of the table it puts in the photo. In the second row of the table it puts in a number, and it has a text field below it. So this will take just a minute, but basically it's just dumping all these photos into that report. And then it gives me a place where I can go in and add captions wherever I want. The other nice thing about it is it's numbering every one of these photos. So if I was referring to, if I wanted to use this report as part of my work order, I could say, refer to photo number 17, like right in the work order notes, if I wanted to print that and make sure it went out with the work order. But I'll give this just a second to finish processing, and I'll show you what it looks like. What tools do you guys use? Are you guys familiar with this one, or anybody found anything else that they use on a regular basis? Does anybody use?
That's the one that we've been using here in 5 counties.
This one here?
Yeah.
Anybody use that one, the iPad app one? This PDF photos?
That's the one they use in here at 6 County.
That's what we use at MAG.
Yeah. So it's got a text field already in it. So, I can just go in and add context. And these are photos that I took during a monitoring. So you can see what I typically take. So there's my fridge. There's the sticker on the fridge. There's the bathroom. But if one of the bathroom fans is not working, you can add that in there. Anything like that. So, and then once you're done with this, if you'll turn it into a PDF, and to do that, you can, I think there's some options if you hit the Office button here, but I usually just hit print and then say print PDF, and it'll turn that into a PDF. And instead of this being this massive file full of lots of photos, it now becomes a very small file with all of the information that we really need in it. All the pictures are large enough to see most of the details that we need to see, and they're all in a format that we can quickly view them all without having to load a bunch of photos. So to get that Microsoft Word tool, so I have shared these slides with all of you. So in the Google Classroom, you can access the Audit Photos slides, and I've got a link in there to the actual tool. I haven't heard anybody tell me lately that they're having any concerns with it being out of date or anything like that. I went to the link just the other day, and it's still there and seems to be working just fine. It's free. The guy that built it just, says you can donate if you want, but you can download it for free. And then I also put a link on here. I made a video a few years ago about how to download it. So anyway, so if you don't have that tool and you want it, there's all the information you would need to get it. Okay, so questions about photos, taking photos.
Hey, Matt, I have a question.
Yeah.
So, I was taking pictures, and I'm also the compiler of the PDFs at the end when we're done with our jobs.
Yeah.
And I've noticed that they don't really take pictures of the returns. Is that something they're supposed to do as part of the deducting system, or does returns not really concern anyone?
That's a great question. I think that it is an excellent idea to take pictures of the returns. if I went into a home and I noticed an issue with a return and they didn't photograph it, I would probably note that on the monitoring report. I'd probably say, hey, you really should have photographed this return, and here's why. With the photos, because it is so hard to really get prescriptive about what you should and should not do when you're taking photos, I have to be very flexible with it. So I would say, you recommend that to those who are taking the photos, because it can help to understand the duct system. But I wouldn't spend a ton of political capital trying to get everybody to do it. So I don't know if that helps or not. Has anybody had any photos like that they felt like that picture of the return was extremely valuable, or you guys feel like it would be kind of neither here nor there?
I think sometimes it depends on the house. I mean, I've had a house before where they had a return up in the attic that wasn't even connected. So in circumstances like that, it can be helpful. In other houses, not as applicable.
Yeah. Thanks. That's a great comment. Any other questions about photos? All right. So there's a quiz about photos. But if you go into that A04 audit photos and take the audit photos quiz, it should take you about 10 minutes.